son of a former governor, now the state's attorney general, a state lawmaker with over 3 decades in Frankfort, and a former state auditor with eyes on Kentucky's top office. Tonight, these 3 candidates field questions from Matt Jones in a live presentation from Hay, Kentucky, being seen in Lexington, Louisville, Paducah, Bowling Green, and Pikeville. This is our gubernatorial debate for the Democratic primary. Here's your host, Mary Jo Perino.
Good evening, and we'd like to welcome our statewide audience in to the beautiful Carrick Theater on the campus of Transylvania University here in Lexington, Kentucky. Over the next hour, you'll be hearing from the 3 candidates vying for the Democratic nomination in Kentucky's 2019 governor's race: Attorney General Andy Beshear, House Minority Leader Rocky Adkins, and former state auditor Adam Edelen. Now, this debate was offered to those who consistently polled at least 5%, and a similar forum was also offered to the Republican candidates for governor. Now let's turn it over to our moderator, Hey Kentucky host, Matt Jones.
Welcome everybody, and thank you very much for joining us. We welcome you to the Hey Kentucky Democratic primary debate. All 3 of these candidates are people that we know. All 3 of these candidates are people that have been on this show. They are vying for the Democratic primary nomination. Now, our goal on this debate is to allow people who are watching this to be able to decide which of the candidates they would be for. We are asking them to try to differentiate from each other and not just turn it into a complete referendum on Matt Bevin, but really about the Democratic primary as a whole. We look forward to this, and we will begin. The first set of questions will each be for all of the candidates, and each will get 1 minute to answer. And we're going to get started. The first one by random draw goes to Mr. Edelen. The pension crisis is, of course, the biggest issue in the state right now, and it has caused a lot of turmoil throughout the state. My question for you is not so much what caused the problem, but what specifically would you do as governor to help fix the pension crisis today and going forward?
Well, thank you, Matt, for having us. And I do want to acknowledge all of you who are here, those who are watching it at home, including Governor Matt Bevin, who earlier today said this debate should be held in Massachusetts or California. No, it shouldn't. These are serious people running for governor of Kentucky, and the issue in this election is that Matt Bevin thinks that he's governor of Mississippi. Matt, to your point, the pensions are a huge issue, and it depends on which pension system you're talking about, whether it be the teacher pension system that was fundamentally well run. The issue is that teachers paid their 13% in every month and the politicians did not. The bigger issue is on the Kentucky retirement system side, which was a playground for good old boys, where political appointees were wined and dined by Wall Street and who weren't looking out for the best interest of pensioners in Kentucky and the people who pay the freight, the taxpayers. We need to reform the system, and we need to make sure we fund it.
Mr. Adkins.
Matt, let me just say, first of all, I'm honored to be here, but second of all, the pension issue itself, me being there and being a part of trying my best to reform and bring the pension system out of 2 crashes of the stock market, the greatest recession of our lifetime. In 2013, 2008, and 2010, but I want to speak to 2013. In a very, very bipartisan way, with stakeholders at the table. And I would tell you that's how any reform should be done. Stakeholders at the table and in a bipartisan way. In 2013, we passed those reforms and they're working. We oversight board in place, pension oversight board, and we also put in place basically that we would fully fund the ARC, and we've done a $3 million audit of the system. Numbers don't lie. Since we put it in place, basically, KRS, Kentucky Retirement System, over the last 2 years has earned over $2.4 billion. Kentucky Teacher Retirement, year before last, earned over 15.5%. And last year, Kentucky Teacher Retirement earned 18.4%. Keep the 13 reforms and fully fund as we move forward.
Time.
Mr. Beshear.
First, let me introduce myself. My name's Attorney General Andy Beshear, and I'm a fighter that gets results. Folks, we desperately have to beat Matt Bevin this fall, and I'm the guy with the track record for doing so. But I also have a track record for getting real results for our families, which we're going to talk about tonight. Listen, I believe a pension is a promise. I went to public school right here in Fayette County, and I owe my teachers so much. I'm committed to fully funding their and everyone else's pension every year that I'm in office. We are going to keep that promise. And it's time. It's time we created that dedicated revenue stream for our pensions. It's time we finally enacted expanded gaming, which would generate up to $550 million. It's time that we consider passing medicinal marijuana, which could generate even more. It's time we had a more fair tax structure, where if you buy a private jet, you have to pay that sales tax. And it's time we stop giving corporate tax breaks to companies that don't pay a living wage. All of those revenues are going to go towards our pension system, and we're going to keep that promise.
Mr. Atkins, I'll go back to you to start the second question. It seems like you're saying you don't believe there really is a pension crisis now after the 2013 reforms. Am I correct that that's your belief? And do you believe that revenue needs to be raised in this state in order to fund pensions, et cetera, and how would you do it?
Well, there's no question that the 13 reforms are working. The numbers, as I said, prove it. I would tell you that any changes that would need to be made would need to be made in a bipartisan way, and they would need to be made with stakeholders at the table. Not to go in a side room and put a pension bill, 291 pages, in the side room and bring it out of that committee with my objections. I was there. I got up and said, "You're completely out of order." And they said, "No, I'm out of order. You're breaking the law." And I said, "No, you're breaking the law. You're absolutely moving this bill out of this committee without the ability to do so." But here's what I believe. Let's look at what has happened with the 13 reforms. They are working. If modifications are made, let's let the Pension Oversight Board that we put in place make those recommendations.
Would you raise revenue? I don't mean to cut you off.
We need to find the revenue, and here's where I would find it. $13 billion of tax loopholes that are out there, $11 billion of a total of a general fund budget. The loopholes are $2 billion more if we only found 10%. That would be $1.3 billion we could put back into pensions and public education.
Mr. Beshear, you mentioned raising revenue via medical marijuana, et cetera. Would you raise any taxes or any other type of tax raise that you think would be necessary?
Well, Matt, when we talk about the pensions, you're going to hear a lot of talk. Everybody says there's going to be for it, but the question is, what action have they taken? When Matt Bevin tried to illegally cut the pensions of every teacher, police officer, firefighter, social worker, EMS, every state, city, county, and school employee, I stood up to him and we beat him 7-0 in front of the Supreme Court, because I don't just talk, I act, and I'm committed to protecting that promise. We can create the type of revenue that we need without raising anybody's taxes. Expanded gaming, the time has come, folks. We lose $550 million just in taxable revenue to other states that we've got to keep here. We've got these corporate tax loopholes where companies that aren't paying a living wage are getting significant funds, and we have an unfair tax system where a luxury houseboat doesn't carry sales tax with it. I can generate more than double every year what Matt Bevin's plan called for, and we can fund this pension.
So you advocate no tax raise even for the wealthiest Kentuckians who just got a tax break?
Well, when we cut corporate tax breaks for private jets, it's those folks that are now going to pay sales tax when they should.
Okay. Mr. Edelen.
We certainly need new revenue, and we have dramatically underfunding our ability to invest in people. Ladies and gentlemen, when the most reliable provider of Wi-Fi in rural Kentucky is McDonald's, when every teacher I know is spending money out of their pockets buying materials for our kids, it's because we're underfunding things that we need to do to make Kentucky relevant to the opportunities of the 21st century. We do have to have revenue, and Kentucky has to make decisions. We have to make decisions by a governor who leads from the front, who says, do we fundamentally value an affordable higher education, or do we value a system so riddled with loopholes designed by the special interest? You know, it seems to me that in this time and place that when you go out and hire a plumber, you pay a sales tax on those services. But if a fancy corporation hires a fancy corporate attorney to peddle their influence in state government, they don't pay the same tax that you do on that plumber. It seems to me that Kentucky's got to make a choice between what we value. A system riddled to benefit...
Time. All right, let's switch gears. Mr. Beshear. Bernie Sanders recently in a Democratic forum said he advocates for free college tuition. My question for you is, do you advocate free college tuition to Kentucky schools, or like Mr. Adkins has suggested, to community and technical schools? Would you be for free tuition for students to public schools in Kentucky?
I believe that free tuition, whether it's to community colleges or to our universities where we can make it work, is a great idea, but it is only one step. Right now, we've seen cuts to our K through 12 programs. Our teachers are teaching out of books held together by duct tape. We don't have the technology in our classrooms because our kids aren't competing with Indiana, they're competing with India. Listen, I believe in public education so much, I selected a teacher as my running mate.
But is that a yes on free public college education for Kentucky
I think we
students?
have to invest in our people as much as possible. And I think when we look at those scholarships, we got to start with our underserved communities where our government has actually kept them down instead of picking them up. Investing in scholarships in our black communities, investing scholarships in our poorest communities. That's where we ought to start, and we ought to work towards universal pre-K too. A teacher on your ticket will tell you how important that is.
I don't mean to push you on this, but free college education for all students?
I believe I've talked about wanting to do everything we can to provide for those types of scholarships for as many of our students as possible.
Okay, Mr. Edelen.
So I think we certainly should start with community and technical colleges. And if we do it completely free, it would cost the state about $300 million a year. If we did it with the last dollar in system like we have in Tennessee, it would cost about $40 million. But folks, we've got to talk about, it's great to talk about all the things that we want to do and the lawsuits we filed. But if you're going to create real action, you have to have money to make this work. And when we have a system that is so outdated, think about the fact that in Kentucky we don't tax vaping the same way we tax cigarettes. When every parent of a middle school child, me included, is rightfully concerned about this. When we're giving away dollars and not insisting that they come back to the state or be monitored through handouts in the form of corporate welfare, we can do better, and we must. But for all of these folks who paint pie-in-the-sky proposals about what they're going to do, the question is, how do you pay for it, Matt? And I hope we can spend a lot of time talking about that tonight.
So it sounds like free community and technical school you'd be fine with, not free university education.
Well, we have to walk before we run. And a concrete way of how we could pay for free community and technical education is to stop doing dumb, expensive stuff. And if we decriminalize small amounts of marijuana, and we stop spending $50 million a year to convict people, 11,000 folks last year, y'all, we can pay for this.
All right, Mr. Adkins, this was your plan, free community and technical colleges. Is that where it would end with you?
Well, it's not where it would end, but I'm glad to see both of these gentlemen on stage agree with my initiative, because it's what we need to do and it's what we have to do if we want to compete with 17 other states that have already implemented free community and technical college throughout the United States. If we're going to compete in this global economy, then we got to make sure that we have a highly educated, a highly trained, and a highly skilled workforce. If we're going to compete in an economy where Kentucky's now #1 export industry happens to be the aerospace industry, and a chance to rebuild economies all over Kentucky, a chance to lift up rural areas of this state in a way that we never thought we could. While we fight for the jobs of today, but we prepare Kentucky for the jobs of tomorrow, public education is going to be the key in making sure that we have a highly skilled, a highly trained workforce. We can do this with community and technical college. We can use the Pell Grants, and we can use the KEYS money as we continue to send kids to four-year institutions as well, and we can get through the community and technical college system by making sure when I sit down as governor, we're able to compete.
All right, let's switch gears to health care. Mr. Edelen, Obamacare was implemented by Mr. Beshear's father as part of the Obamacare ACA here in Kentucky. Did you agreed with the implementation, but was there anything about it you would change, and do you think it has worked as Governor Bevin has talked about repealing?
It has worked. It ended a 100-year experiment in Kentucky of having a large uninsured population. And ladies and gentlemen, that approach gave you the worst health care outcomes in America, and it darn near bankrupted us. It was absolutely the right thing to do to embrace the Medicaid expansion, and now we lead the nation in having reduced our very large uninsured population. But I do have criticisms of it. Almost immediately upon expanding Medicaid, we handed out oversight of the program to a set of largely for-profit managed care organizations. And the fact of the matter is, as auditor, I investigated this thoroughly. We had a huge mess at the beginning of this, where private providers were not being reimbursed for the care that they provided. These middlemen were taking a lot of money. And so I think it's important, now that we're approaching a decade of this of the Medicaid expansion, we really do need to do a comprehensive top-to-bottom review of the effectiveness of managed care in Kentucky.
Mr. Adkins.
And I stand here tonight as a 24-year cancer survivor. I've had needles in my arms, I've had chemo, I've had radiation. Expanded Medicaid is one of the best things that we have done here in Kentucky to reduce the number of people that don't have health insurance from 19% to almost 6%. I was there as majority leader as we discussed and we talked about the expansion of that, working to make sure that we implemented this right as we stood and we supported a better way for rural areas of this state and for urban areas of this state. So the changes that probably need to be looked at is where can we save money at? Well, let me tell you, there's a place called the Pharmacy Benefit Managers. Pharmacy benefit managers right now, they put in place a price that comes down and then they cut off the middle, their earnings, and from their earnings they make a lot of money. We could probably save as much as $200 million if we would let the state go back to manage this program and actually do the efficiencies that need to be done. This waiver that this governor's put in is wrong and it's bad for the healthcare industry as well.
Mr. Beshear.
Healthcare is a basic human right, and every single Kentucky family should be able to go see a doctor when they're sick. But there is talk and there is action. And I don't just talk about supporting health care, I'm fighting for it right now. There are 3 national lawsuits where your federal government is trying to tear away federal health reforms that are so important. They're trying to tear away mandatory coverage for pre-existing conditions. That's half of all Kentuckians. They're trying to re-allow discrimination and charge women more for the same coverage as men. They're trying to reinstitute a lifetime cap, and I'll tell you how deadly that is. If you've seen our first ad, it features Lucas. He's an amazing 8-year-old that also has type 1 diabetes. With a lifetime cap at 8, he'd already be out of everything his insurance carrier wants to pay. I'm fighting in all 3 of those lawsuits, and we've already won 1. I'm also the only candidate with a health care plan. It's on andybeshear.com. Read about it. And I'm the only one taking action to lessen costs because we have launched an investigation of that middleman, that pharmacy benefit manager, to make sure Kentuckians are being treated fairly.
All right, we asked our viewers for a Twitter question. A number were submitted, and I have one right now, and this starts with you, Mr. Adkins. Is there a future, this is from Lucas Harrison, is there a future in Eastern Kentucky for coal? Do you believe the coal industry can continue? And considering its historic decline, what specific economic industries can come to the mountains and help?
Well, I can tell you this, that the coal industry will continue to exist, but not to the levels that it has in the past. And I can tell you that over the last 30 years that I have served in the Kentucky House of Representatives, we have built the infrastructure in rural Kentucky and specifically Eastern Kentucky. Better roads and bridges for access, expanded water and sewer, communities now that have a regional airport to handle corporate jets, regional industrial parks now that we're ready to use and be able to benefit us as we attract the industries of the future. As governor and from rural Kentucky, standing on this stage that suffered from the economies of Eastern Kentucky and the downturn of the coal economy, you're looking at a guy that will have a vision every day of how we rebuild rural Kentucky, but how we lift up the economic engines of the urban areas as well. The aerospace industry is one of the places we can do it. We're educating that workforce here now. It's our #1 export industry, a $12.5 billion industry, aviation school, space science center. This is where we diversify. This is how we build a new economy.
Mr. Beshear.
Climate change is real, but don't take my word for it. Ask any Kentucky farmer who has to deal with the changing weather patterns. Ask the U.S. military that is already preparing for it and putting those plans in place. We have to diversify our energy portfolio, protect as many jobs as we can, but create as many new jobs as we can, but we have to do it responsibly. Because every year our utilities try to raise the cost of power and water to levels that people can't pay. Listen, I was in Pikeville about 2 years ago when a 9-year-old child told me that all he wanted for Christmas was to have the lights turned back on. We have to be responsible as we move into this new energy economy. And I'll tell you, as Attorney General, I've had to fight to cut $1 billion off rate increases all over this state.
So is there a future for coal in Eastern Kentucky?
Well, I believe that it's yes, but we have to have that diverse energy portfolio all around the state, and we have to do it at a pace in a way where we never turn off any family's lights just because they don't make enough money.
Mr. Edelen.
Well, folks, they say that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. And Andy, that was the most flattering thing you've ever said about me. My goodness, people, when a candidate for governor gets up and literally mimics the speech that you gave several months ago, it tells you you must be doing something right. Ladies and gentlemen, the people of Eastern Kentucky cannot rely on the platitudes from talking point politicians to create the economy of the future. They need to adopt a 21st century leader as governor who has actually done it. Later this year, we will break ground on a $130 million capital investment, Matt Bevin, not a dime of that from the taxpayers. My partner is a coal company. We will put 600,000 solar panels on a 700-acre mountaintop removal site and create jobs for at least 200 to 300 out-of-work miners. Ladies and gentlemen, this isn't cheap talk. This isn't parroting someone else's talking points. These are the words and the leadership demonstrated by somebody who has actually done it. And the question to the people of Kentucky is, are you ready for it?
Is there a future for coal in Eastern Kentucky?
Matt, there is a future for metallurgic coal, which is the coal that is required to produce steel. The coal that is used to produce energy, thermal coal, is really in serious decline, and we're seeing it all over the country.
All right. A lot of people are focusing right now on the 2020 presidential race as well as the early primaries starting. Now, I have to get the three of you to promise me an answer here. I need an answer. 2016, who did you vote for President of the United States? And if you were forced in 2020 to make a vote now for one of the candidates, who has impressed you the most?
Well, I voted for Secretary Clinton in the last election in both the primary and the general. And Matt, I can't even keep up with who was filed for this election this time. But let me tell you what, this election for governor is not about who's in the White House. It's about what's going on in your house. It's about the fact that too many Kentuckians have a job where their wages never go up, but their bills do every month. It's about too many families that are worried about taking their child to see a doctor because of the cost of health care. It's about our families that are worried about losing someone to this opioid epidemic, or whether the promise for their pension will be broken. Folks, some people talk about the past, some people talk about the future. I'm the candidate of right now. I'm running to try to get you that better job right now. I'm running because that person who's going to OD tomorrow can't wait. We have to help them right now. I'm running because we deserve health care, all of us, right now. And I'm going to work every single day to make sure I help our people right now.
So no candidate has impressed you. If you had to vote now, you would do what?
Of the 24 or 28?
You still got to vote for one.
We'd have to look.
All right, we'd have to look. Mr. Edelen.
So I voted for Hillary Clinton, and I'm still waiting to engage in the presidential campaign. Lots of candidates have impressed me, but I'm not ready to make a decision because I don't have the full benefit of the facts in front of me. So I look forward to being on your program, Matt, as the Democratic nominee for governor, and you asking that as we get closer to the Kentucky primary.
So nobody has come out and you thought looked impressive?
Well, I mean, I understand Joe Biden, I think, is filing tomorrow. I think Jay Inslee is running on climate change, and there are a lot of people in between. I think let's give them an opportunity. My goodness, somebody on this stage may announce for president shortly.
I'm not going to do that. Mr. Adkins, go ahead.
Are you announcing?
Yeah.
Matt?
Mr. Adkins.
Secretary Clinton, as far as the 2020 presidential race goes, I'm not focused on that. I'm focused on Kentucky. And I'm focused on this governor's race to become the next governor of this great Commonwealth of Kentucky. I've stood in the trenches toe-to-toe over the last 3.5 years fighting Governor Bevin's bad policy and his bad agenda. I have fought tooth and toenail to make sure, as the next governor, standing there as the floor leader and the minority leader, as we get ready to go in to the next 21st century of being able to provide good jobs for our people. I'm not focused on 2020. More than likely, the candidate may not even be in the race that will draw the interest of me. I want to make sure that the candidate talks about Kentucky. I want to make sure the 2020 president is focused on our people when I am governor to make sure they're going to come here and help us with our needs when it comes to infrastructure, when it comes to health care, and when it comes to lifting up working families and the infrastructure of this great state. That's what I'm focused on.
Please, everyone, hold your applause. We've asked for everybody to not applaud.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Let me keep order here, Rocky. All right. So I want to do, for this part, we want to do some quick hitters. These are going to be 30-second answers, and it doesn't, basically, if you would, give me a yes or no answer along with a reason as to why. 30 seconds for each answer. Let's start with this. Medicinal marijuana and recreational marijuana. I think all of you are for medicinal marijuana. Are you for the legalization of recreational marijuana?
I'm for medicinal marijuana, and I'm for doing it right now. And I am the only candidate that is for decriminalizing a half ounce or less of marijuana. We just cannot afford, folks, in a state this broke, to spend $50 million a year prosecuting 11,000 people for possession of small amounts of marijuana. It's dumb, it's expensive, and it's also terribly racist in its application. So this is a chance for us to do the right thing.
But if you're for decriminalizing it, are you for legalizing?
Well, Matt, we have to walk before we run. And by decriminalizing it, it affords us the opportunity to prepare local communities for what they would do in the event that this experiment worked and we wanted to go to full-blown legalization.
Mr. Adkins.
Serving in the General Assembly and having a chance to be a co-sponsor of the medical marijuana bill, I studied the research of both the scientific and medical evidence that, without question, being a cancer survivor, as I mentioned, that there's no question that for certain medical conditions, medical marijuana is the right approach. That can't even pass the General Assembly. On a 16-to-1 vote coming out of the committee, it didn't even get a vote on the House floor from the majority party in Frankfort, Kentucky.
So recreational?
Recreational, Kentucky is not ready. I'm not for it yet. I agree that we got to walk before we run. Medical marijuana needs to be debated. It needs to be passed in Kentucky.
Mr. Beshear.
As you know, I'm for medicinal marijuana, and folks, I'm the top law enforcement official in the state. I didn't come to this lightly, but I have seen the devastation of opioids. I have met with and held hundreds now of parents that have lost children to this epidemic, and we have got to have a way to treat chronic pain that doesn't load medicine cabinets up with things that make people addicted and give hundreds of billions of dollars to companies that have caused deaths of Kentuckians. But when it comes to keeping people out of jail, I've actually acted. We funded the Rocket Docket for several years, which moves people out of the criminal justice system into treatment as quickly as they can get there.
So no on recreational.
Well, every state that's done this right has done medicinal first. It helps you put the procedures in place. Being Attorney General, I know that I can do that responsibly because we have to do it right. Real prescription, controls over dispensaries, it has to be done in an orderly way.
All right. If Roe versus Wade were to be overturned with the new Supreme Court and a bill came before you as governor banning abortion in the state of Kentucky, would you sign it, Mr. Adkins?
When you take an oath of office, you take an oath of office to not only uphold the laws of the land, but the Constitution of the United States of America. So on that law or any other, I would uphold the Constitution and the law of the land.
But if the Supreme Court changed the law of the land to give you the ability to do it, which might happen, would you sign a bill then?
Again, I would uphold the Constitution and the law of the land on that issue or any other. So my answer would be yes, because if that was the law of the land, and that was basically the Constitution that had been implemented by the Supreme Court, yes.
Mr. Beshear.
I'm pro-choice, and I support Roe v. Wade. And any bill that came to me as governor banning that procedure, I would veto it and veto it immediately. And some people will talk about their position on this. But again, I've actually acted. When the legislature passed an unconstitutional bill in 2016 attacking reproductive rights, I refused to defend it. This year, when they tried to pass an unconstitutional bill attacking those rights, I told them we'd lose in court. I even submitted a brief in front of the Sixth Circuit supporting reproductive rights. They are constitutional and they are the right rights.
Mr. Edelen.
I would veto it because, folks, to build a modern Kentucky, you can't do that without recognizing the full equality of women. And you can't recognize the full equality of women if you don't trust them enough to make their own health care decisions. And my ticket is the only one in which both the candidate for governor and the candidate for lieutenant governor are unapologetically supportive of a woman's right to make her own health care decisions. This is incredibly important. And you need to make sure that you have absolute clarity in a candidate for governor who's going to protect this important right.
This question, I just need a yes or no answer. I'm not even going to do the time. If there is a bill that were to come forward banning discrimination based on sexual orientation in the workplace in Kentucky, would you vote yes or no, Mr. Beshear?
Oh, I believe that discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation ought to be outlawed all across Kentucky. But let me respond to the last comment, because I can tell you that our ticket is pro-choice, that we both support Roe v. Wade, and that I've actually taken action, not just talk, action to protect those rights.
Mr. Edelen. Sexual orientation.
Hell yes.
Mr. Adkins.
Yes.
We're going to take a quick break right here and take a little commercial. When we come back, I will go one-on-one with each candidate. This is the Hey Kentucky Governor's Debate here in Lexington.
You're watching live coverage of Hey Kentucky's gubernatorial debate for the Democratic primary. Here's your moderator, Matt Jones.
Welcome back to the Hey Kentucky gubernatorial debate. I hope to do better in this section than I did in getting them to pick a 2020 presidential candidate. But we will start this section. I'm going to give each candidate one-on-one questions that are specifically about them. We did a draw prior, and Mr. Edelen is first. I'll start with this, Mr. Edelen. In 2015, you ran for auditor and were defeated, whereas Mr. Beshear won as Attorney General. For a lot of people, beating Matt Bevin is the number one thing they want to see happen. What makes you believe you can win this race this time when you lost last time and Mr. Beshear won?
Well, it's a fair question. And the difference between Andy's performance and mine was 2%. And the difference between our outcomes was that everybody's heard of Steve Beshear and nobody has heard of Larry Edelen. Until lately, ladies and gentlemen. But listen, Matt, I've won more than I've lost in my life. I've been knocked down. And I think to beat Matt Bevin, we're going to have a Democratic candidate who brings two attributes. The first is a proven track record of creating new economy jobs for people, particularly in the forgotten places. I'm the only candidate who brings that as a professional experience. Secondly, I'm the only candidate on this stage who has a demonstrated record that is unblemished in fighting corruption. People know that as state auditor, I pursued public corruption in every area, from the Commissioner of Agriculture's office to being the first auditor to root out corruption in our public school system. To beat Matt Bevin, you've got to have somebody who has the clarity of purpose, knows what they're about, and the ability to relate and communicate on their own in every community in Kentucky, and I think I'm the fellow for that job.
But part of stopping corruption is openness, and one of the things that Governor Bevin has been criticized for is his failure to release his tax returns. You picked Gil Holland as your lieutenant governor, and he is refusing to release his tax returns as well. In the past, you've criticized Bevin for not releasing his tax returns. Why doesn't that also apply to your lieutenant governor, who presumably could become governor?
Well, and if he becomes governor, he would have to make a different choice. But let's be clear, Gil Holland, to a granular level, folks, has filled out his financial disclosure state in making it clear what he owns, in a very minute, detailed way. And so his ability, we've determined he has no conflicts of interest, any that might arise. He can certainly eliminate quickly. He can eliminate stock portfolios, for instance. But this is about transparency, and it's about, my tax returns are available on our website. People can look them. I will file them every year that I'm governor.
But to be fair, Matt Bevin would probably say, I don't have any conflicts either.
We wouldn't know that, Matt, because
we don't know that
because the way he fills out his financial disclosure form leaves serious degrees of enormous discrepancy. For instance, he says that he's a holder of Apple and Google stock, etc. My running mate has provided down to minute detail precisely what he and his family own. And it's there for the public to see. And I think before anybody criticizes us about this, you ought to do the work of going in and looking precisely at what we've reported. And if there are any questions beyond that, we're certainly happy to answer them.
You've received some criticism from the African American community for your statements when Colin Kaepernick kneeled during an NFL game and you called him a name and said you disagreed. Looking back, do you think you messed that up, and do you still agree that kneeling during NFL games was wrong?
Well, it was before he kneeled, Matt, to be precise, and I reacted without listening, and I think that's a mistake many of us have made, and I'm certainly someone who admits the mistakes that we have made, but I'm proud that we've got the endorsement of the Louisville Black Defender, which is the largest African American publication in Kentucky, because of a demonstrated record to equity, whether it be trying to erase the equity gap in our own Fayette County public schools, whether it be launching the reform of our criminal justice system that limits the trajectory of people because of mistakes they make, particularly in their youth, or whether it's my passionate belief that we ought to have the automatic restoration of felons' civil rights who've paid their debt to society. That's my record, and that's why we're doing so well amongst people of color.
On that issue, you're for felons being able to vote after they leave prison. What about in prison?
No,
some Democratic candidates have been for that.
I don't agree with that. You have to pay your debt to society fully and completely before you have your rights restored. That's the system we'll have when I'm governor.
All right. Thank you very much. Mr. Adkins.
Sir.
I want to ask you, follow up on the abortion issue, because you said you'd follow the law of the land. But if Roe versus Wade were to be overturned, you would get to decide the law of the land. The Constitution would then say it's up to the states. So it is important what your personal position is. If a bill came before, which probably in Kentucky would happen, banning abortion if Roe versus Wade gets reversed, will you sign it?
Well, what I would do is basically we got to see what the ruling is going to be first from the Supreme Court, whether they turn it back over to the states or whether that is the ruling of the Supreme Court. It would be the law of the land that it was overturned. If the decision was to turn it back to the states, that would be a different story. But I will say again, you know, the general counsel that I would hire would give me the direction that I need, basically to uphold the oath that I would take for that office. You know, I'm pro-life, but I would say to this that you represent your constituents as a legislator, but I would say further than that. It's more than about putting food on the table for these babies. It's about a roof over their head. It's about supporting House Bill 1, which basically brought forth the ability for adoption and foster parents. It's about making sure these children have quality public education and health care as well. It's about making sure hopefully we build the economy that will create the kind of jobs that these children need for the future. That's where I'm at on the issue.
On another answer, you said in the last segment you would be for a bill that would ban economic discrimination on sexual orientation. But you did vote while in the legislature for a constitutional amendment to ban gay marriage. Do you regret that vote? Has your mind changed on the issue?
Well, I think that views change over time, just like most of the
Has
Kentuckians
yours?
says. Yes, there's no question about that. I think people ought to be treated with dignity and respect. I think that we ought to be uniting people instead of dividing people the way that this governor is doing throughout the Commonwealth of Kentucky. I think that we ought to be worrying about a team effort of how we build a strong Kentucky, regardless of where the people come from or who they are. I think that when I put together a cabinet, it's going to be a cabinet that is inclusive and one that looks like Kentucky and one that will lift up Kentucky and help us, give me the direction that I need to be able to make the decisions I make that will build a better Kentucky.
A story came out last week about funding for Brady Industries, which you've been a supporter of in Greenup County, that $200 million has come from a Russian oligarch's company who at one point gave about $2 million to a PAC associated with Senator McConnell. Do you agree with the decision of the state to support the $200 million investment by the Russian oligarch, or do you think that that was a mistake, and do you regret being part of the $15 million given to Brady Industries?
Let me tell you something. I live in that region of Kentucky, and we've taken it on the chin for a long time. We've seen the downturn of the coal economy where thousands of jobs have been lost directly and indirectly. We've seen the closing of a coal-fired power plant up there that cost hundreds of jobs more, and AK Steel announced its closing just the other day. We've taken it on the chin. Here's what I would do. Regardless of the decisions, I support the vote that I made, as most members of the General Assembly did, to try to create economic hope and opportunity for a region of Kentucky that needs it the most. I'll stand and fight for that every day that will create the kind of jobs that our people need and deserve. I walked out the door one day with 1,200 people, so I know what it feels like. So I would tell you this, as governor, I will oversee that project to make sure the people's tax dollars are implemented in a way they need to be implemented for the promise of those jobs that will be created from that investment of $1.5 billion. It will not only change that region, it will ripple throughout the Commonwealth and ripple throughout the coal fields of eastern Kentucky that need jobs the most, and put our coal miners, put our railroad workers and our steel workers back to work.
Last question. The biggest complaint I've heard of your candidacy from some Democrats is, how do we vote for the person that was in the legislature when some of these pension problems happened? How would you answer that?
Well, I would tell you I'm proud of my public service. First of all, I'm one of 138 people, and I would tell you I cannot control the crash of the stock market twice and the greatest recession of our lifetime, but I'm proud to have been involved in a very bipartisan way to get us back on the right track to live up to the promise that's been made to our public employees and teachers across this great Commonwealth.
Thank you, Mr. Adkins. Mr. Beshear, you have had a number of public feuds with Matt Bevin. And there is some concern amongst some Democrats that voters who maybe don't know will just go, oh, the Beshears and the Bevins, they just hate each other. How do you differentiate to make it to where you are a different person than your father who was governor, and why you are not just running as a feuding with Matt Bevin?
Well, I'm not going to run away from the fact that beating Matt Bevin is the most important thing in the fall. But don't take my word for it. Ask a family with a child with a pre-existing condition. Ask a teacher who's been called names and had his or her retirement put in a sewer bill and illegally passed. Ask anybody who's worried about losing someone in this drug epidemic. Beating Matt Bevin is the most important thing, and I'm proud of my track record of taking him on and beating him. When he illegally cut the budgets of our universities, I sued him, we won, we returned over $18 million. When he illegally cut those retirements of 200,000 public servants, I stood up to him and we beat him 7-0 in front of the Supreme Court. And Matt, now that he has said that he's going to move forward and subpoena teachers and try to fine them $1,000, I'm going to stop him again. If he does not repeal and remove those subpoenas by the beginning of next week, Matt Bevin, I'll see you in court.
All right, speaking of court, please keep applause down. You were a private attorney, and a story has come out today that over 12,000 Boy Scouts claim to be sexually abused at some point during their time in the Scouts. That's a national story. As a private attorney, you represented the Boy Scouts and helped defend some of these cases. And at one point said that some victims should have their cases dismissed because it was an inexcusable delay in their filing and claiming of abuse. Do you regret any of those decisions, and how do you explain them?
Well, every child deserves to be safe, and I've committed my time as Attorney General into trying to eliminate child abuse in our lifetime. Now, when I was in private practice, I had a senior attorney come to me and asked me to work on a case that was about the policies and procedures of the Boy Scouts in the 70s. But what I learned from that case has driven my work as Attorney General. We've nearly tripled the number of child predators that we've caught and arrested, including someone who landed at Bluegrass Airport thinking he was going to harm 2 young children. We stopped a person from Texas who came in thinking he was going to buy a 7-year-old girl for $200 and as much meth as he could bring in. I'll put my record of standing up and protecting children up against anybody.
So you don't regret the advocacy you did on behalf of the Boy Scouts?
Oh, what I learned from that case has taught me so much. It's what led me to create the first Survivors Council of any Attorney General, giving survivors a voice where one of them has now banned child marriage in Kentucky. It's what led me to push for a statewide grand jury where the Attorney General could shut down any institutional abuse, whether it's in the Catholic Church or in the Boy Scouts, and I pushed for a longer statute of limitations, not during this campaign, but immediately after getting elected, and I even fought the Boy Scouts to do it. Now, what that case drove me to do is to try to protect so many that need our help.
All right, let me ask you a different question. You've used a lot of language about Governor Bevin. You've called him at times a bully. You've said you said that you would restore dignity to Frankfort in an office that doesn't have it. And you said you were tired of him calling people's names. And when I read all that, I thought, you know who else that applies to? The President of the United States. Do you believe the President of the United States is a bully, calls people names, and do you believe those criticisms apply to him in a state where he is very popular?
Well, like I started, I don't think this race is about the White House. I think it's about what's going on in each and every one of our houses. But name calling is always wrong, no matter who does it.
Do you think the president is a bully?
Well, I believe that the president has called people's names, and it's wrong. But look, I've served under this president. And when he's done things that have helped Kentucky, he has funded our cold case unit that has now gotten 7 indictments off this rape kit backlog. I've supported him. But when he has done wrong and tried to tear away health care from half of all Kentuckians, I have fought him, and at least in one case, I've beaten him.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, the next section of this gets a little spicy because we allow the candidates to ask each other questions. We did this again by a random draw. Mr. Atkins is first. He can ask a question to either of the candidates. He gets to choose which one. Go ahead, sir.
Andy, I have a question for you.
Sure.
You know, you've made an issue out of releasing tax reform, basically our tax documents. And I have done that, and my running mate has as well. But you've made an issue out of it for the time that you've been in office. My question to you would be, are you willing to release your tax returns before you became Attorney General while you were still a corporate attorney with a law firm? Are you willing, like I have with my private business, to release your tax returns when you were working as a corporate attorney?
Well, thank you, Rocky, for the question. Folks, I believe in transparency, and it is so critical right now. We have a governor that is engaged in more personal enrichment than we have ever seen. He's purchased a mansion from a state contractor at half price. He's given his best buddy a $370,000 job that you, our families, pay for. And one of the reasons he's gotten away with it is he's refused to release his tax returns, one of the first governors in recent memory to do so. Because of that, I started releasing my tax returns. First Attorney General to ever do it, and I did it when I wasn't running for any office. And I've released 2016, I've released 2017, and I think I'm the only candidate that's released 2018, even though everybody just filed them a couple of weeks ago. I provided more transparency in this race and as Attorney General than anybody else, but I tell you what, to both candidates, if you and your running mates want to release more tax returns, if you want to step up to that challenge, I am more than happy to do it. Everybody ought to be playing on the same playing field, and we ought to tell the people of Kentucky that we work for you. As Attorney General, I have one client and one client alone. It's the people of Kentucky. My tax returns show that I will never be bought. I will always fight for you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Beshear, you can ask a question to either of the two candidates.
We'll have to turn this way regardless. Rocky, my question is also on tax returns.
Yes, sir.
Again, I believe that one of the reasons that this governor has engaged in a personal enrichment at a level we all want to stop is because of his failure to release those returns, especially while he's in office. It makes me question, what does he own? Is that why he's stopping my opioid lawsuits? But I think, and you think, it's important that our running mates release their tax returns too, and we both have. Why is it so important to you that candidates and their running mates release those tax returns?
Well, it's about transparency, to be very honest with you. It's about running a statewide race and people having the interest and the right to know the interest that you're involved in. That's the reason I released my tax returns, and the only reason we didn't release 2018, we've asked for an extension, is the only reason they haven't been released for me and my running mate as well. When you're running across Kentucky from Whitesburg to Paducah, you know, your person that does your taxes calls every now and then and says, you know, we better wait till you get this governor's race over with before we do this 18 deal. So that's the reason for that. But yes, I think that when you run a statewide race, that the governor and lieutenant governor should release those returns. The people of Kentucky have the right to know.
All right, Mr. Edelen, you have a question for either of the two.
So, Andy, I was deeply moved, as I know we all are, by your commitment to medical marijuana. The difference between your position and mine is that you believe it ought to go through a constitutional amendment process, and I fundamentally don't. So my question to you is, if in a failed leadership moment, the Beshear administration to push for this happening immediately, how do you justify this to the epileptic who could be saved from multiple seizures a day? How do you justify this to a woman who is battling breast cancer and going through chemotherapy who could be helped by medical marijuana? Why should they have to wait because you won't act immediately?
Oh, I'm willing to sign a bill right now. If a bill comes to us, and it's a bill I will push, I will sign it. Now, I will say just about every state that's done this well and responsibly has done it through a referendum where everybody gets to have their voices heard, and that's a process that we ought to consider, but I'm ready to sign it right now. And again, folks, when you're the top law enforcement official in this state, when you have fought fentanyl and carfentanil, I've pulled an overdosing man out of a car 3 blocks from here and watched him die in front of me on Broadway before we were able to bring him back. Coming to this position has been a bit of a journey, but opioids don't help with long-term pain. They've caused addiction all over this state. And people who have needed help, who have needed pain relief, have gotten something that has not only not helped them, but has gotten their kids addicted and their friends addicted. Medicinal marijuana gives us the opportunity to give them pain relief without stocking those medicine cabinets. But I didn't stop there, because I want to clean out those medicine cabinets. There's already too much out there. I launched a Kentucky opioid disposal program aimed at cleaning out every single one, because 80% of new addiction still comes from pills. And 70% of that are someone else's pills. That means the most likely way your kids are going to become addicted is in your medicine cabinet or someone else's. As Attorney General, I haven't just talked about this, I've taken action, and the next governor has to have a track record of that action.
Now, as part of our prior agreement on this topic, all candidates agreed that if one candidate received 2 questions, they would be able to ask the candidate that received no questions. So, Mr. Beshear, would you like to ask a question to Mr. Edelen?
Oh, I'm good. I enjoy the extra time.
All right. Well, then I will ask a question to Mr. Edelen. On the top, one of the big issues across the country has been gun violence. We've seen the school shootings, and this state has, of course, been hit by it as well. You've talked a lot about being a sportsman and shooting weapons. Do you believe there are any gun control steps that should take place in Kentucky at all? And if so, what would they be?
Well, I'll give you a perfect example of what I would change out of the gate. Ladies and gentlemen, the adoption by the legislature this session to eliminate concealed and carry and go to permitless carry will have the net impact of making Kentucky a Wild West state. At exactly the time and place where we're trying to build a modern Kentucky, where we're trying to communicate to folks that we're not on some crazy ideological wing, we've adopted this strategy, and it's dead wrong. And I would say that I am the right person to make the case that we ought to have a more common sense approach to guns because I grew up in a gun culture. Because I grew up in Flaherty, Kentucky. My Meade County father handed me a gun not long into my youth. Folks, any Republican who wants to have this conversation with me, I'll have it anywhere, anytime, but let's do it at a gun range. Because if you can outshoot me, I'll hush. But if you can't, let's have a reasonable conversation about reasonable gun laws in Kentucky. Certainly we need to protect the Second Amendment. I have been an advocate for the Second Amendment my entire life. But I don't know any sportsman, I don't know any hunter who doesn't understand that with gun ownership, with the right of gun ownership, comes the responsibility of gun ownership. And when we have allowed this scale to get upset so in favor of rights over responsibility, we run the risk of making our societies much less safe. I have a clear position on this. The Chief Law Enforcement Officer of Kentucky does not. But folks, anything that makes it more difficult for a law enforcement officer to come home safely at the end of their shift is something that we ought to oppose strongly.
Okay, I have one question for each of you that I like to ask in contentious debates. I'll start with you, Mr. Adkins, and go to Mr. Beshear and then Mr. Edelen. 30 seconds to answer. Tell me one good thing Matt Bevin has done as governor. There has to be something.
Best thing I can say is he has a beautiful family.
I like that answer, but at the same time, I mean, there have been factories come. There has been some economic development. Does he deserve any credit for that?
Here's what I would like to say. He would like to take credit for all of it, but economic development's not an overnight deal. It's a 30-year investment, and I've been part of that 30-year investment to make that happen. So I'm glad he's taken advantage of that to bring jobs to Kentucky. I'm glad to see that.
Mr. Beshear.
Well, I think this is another issue of talk versus action. There's at least one area where Governor Bevin and the First Lady's talk has been a good thing, and that's in foster care. Our foster children are children that society has failed, and oftentimes they end up in situations that no one ever should, and we cannot abandon any child. The problem is in the action. We have less foster parents today than we did when Matt Bevin became governor. So I'm not only going to continue to talk his talk, we're going to walk the walk and make sure we provide a loving home to all those kids.
Mr. Edelen.
Yeah, I think the governor's commitment to foster care shouldn't be questioned. I mean, this is someone who has walked the walk. I mean, this is a guy who has a number of adopted children. And I think, so therefore, I don't think it makes any sense to question his commitment to reforming the system. So I'll take him at his word. I think he's doing the right thing and ought to be applauded for those efforts.
Okay, now it's time for closing statements. We will give each candidate 1 minute each to give the case for why they should get your vote if you're available to vote in the Democratic primary. Mr. Beshear, you're first.
Thank you all so much. You've heard a lot tonight about us, but this race isn't about us, it's about you. And it's about your anxieties at the end of the day. Too many of you are stuck in jobs where you fall further behind every week because you haven't gotten a raise in years. Too many of you are worried about going to see the doctor because of what it costs. There was a senior, 80 plus years old in Western Kentucky, that asked me what it would cost to see the doctor on something really important just yesterday. It's about families that have lost too much to this opioid crisis and are afraid about losing more. And it's about people who've been called names and had their pensions stripped from them. But I'm a fighter, and I have shown you that I will stand up against anybody for Kentuckians. I've taken on Matt Bevin, I've taken on the opioid companies, I've taken on human traffickers, I've taken on abusers, I've taken on anyone that would threaten our way of life, and I am ready to fight for you. I've loved my time as Attorney General. I've gotten to fight for every Kentucky family, and it's exactly why I want to be your governor. Let's get back to being the good people that we are, and let's move forward together.
Mr. Edelen.
My friends, I'm not running for governor to beat Matt Bevin, though that is a heck of a fringe benefit. I am running for governor to build a modern Kentucky where we have the opportunity to give our people a fighting chance in a changing economy, the opportunity to have a fighting chance at keeping our children and grandchildren right here in Kentucky realizing their version of the American dream and the part of Kentucky they call home. But folks, to do that, we have to fix our broken politics. And relying on literally the same old names and the same old tired voices parroting the same old talking points will only give you what you've always gotten. We need a campaign that's committed to changing our broken politics. It's why Gil Holland and I are the only ticket not taking a dime of corporate PAC money. We are talking about the issues that matter, from bringing opportunity to forgotten places to valuing education and having an agenda for it, which is why we've been endorsed by the teachers. Ladies and gentlemen, embrace this campaign. Let's build a modern Kentucky, and let's make sure our kids have a shot.
Mr. Adkins.
Matt, I got in this race not only to beat Matt Bevin, I got in this race to provide really the experienced leadership that's gotten proven results over the years. What better training ground can you be in to bring the experience of serving in the Kentucky House of Representatives as the majority leader and the minority leader for over 17 years now? What better place to serve on the Budget Committee to understand how to write a budget and how to put a budget together? What better place can you get the results to have the relationships within the legislature, but between Democrats and Republicans, to be able to bring about bipartisan support that's going to be needed to bring about results for the people of Kentucky. I'm the only one standing on this stage that understands that. How to make state government work again for the people of Kentucky. I bring the experience, I bring the proven leadership, and I bring the vision to build a better Kentucky. Tonight, I'd like to ask this audience and the people of Kentucky, I need your support. I'd appreciate your vote. It's good to be with you tonight.
Thank you all. I would like to thank all three candidates for coming. It was very good of you to do it. This audience is statewide, and the streaming numbers we've seen are through the roof. So thank you all very much for doing it. I'm going to throw it to Mary Jo Perino.
Thank you all so much for watching this live presentation of Hey Kentucky. Of course, you can follow the entire primary on May 22nd on LEX18 News and on LEX18.com. We do want to remind you that a similar forum was offered to the candidates for the Republican primary. And of course, tune in every weeknight at 7:30 for Hey Kentucky, or go to heykentucky.com. Thanks to Transylvania University and to Matt Jones for moderating tonight's event. Good night.